right, welcome everybody to episode 4 of Security Snippets on Detection Engineering. In this series on the basics of detection engineering, I've covered a few topics, starting with a basic definition of detection engineering, then moving how to start with the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Then we've done a bit about the research side of things where I brought in Kevin Lowe from our team at Anvilogic. Today, I brought in another special guest who I'm going to ask about building detections and how he goes about that. My guest today is a U.S. Navy veteran and current reservist, as well as a fellow Chattanooga, Tennessee resident named Eric Hines. Eric leads our threat detection engineering team at Anvilogic, and he and his team pump out a prolific amount of new detection content on a daily basis. So we have a very specific way of building our detections here at Anvilogic, and we can talk about that some and why we do it the way we do it. We'll try to be clear about general best practices and then how specifically we do it so that we can help level you all up in your detection engineering. So Eric, first off, thanks for joining me today and taking some time to talk about what you do for detection engineering. And as a way to start things off, can you give us the quick version of how you got into this field and detection engineering specifically? You up for that?
Yeah, sounds good. I guess the quick version is I was active duty Navy at the time and had to switch fields. So cyber was something that was in the news. So I was like, all right, let me see what I can do about this cyber business. And so was able to got approval to cross rate to change jobs to 2012. Started joining the cyber field, cyber realm, and fell in love with it. There's a lot of stuff that I like to do. I learned a bunch of different things. I never really did the same thing at any one time, but that was great. You know, I learned a lot of different things, that offensive and defensive cyber. So it was a lot of fun. So that's essentially how I was able to, I guess, weasel my way into the cyber domain.
It's
Uh,
it's fascinating to hear because like we all have different ways that we got into it, right? And one of the things that for those of us that have stayed in it is we love the variety and the change, right? Like you said, we never do the same thing twice. Adversaries are always changing their tactics and techniques, and we have to come up with ways to find those. All right, sweet. Thanks for sharing. So first question I think that might be useful is how do you prioritize which detections to work on here at Anvilogic? And then how would you prioritize detections if you're working in-house for a large enterprise? Is there any difference there? We've talked a bit about starting with MITRE ATT&CK in a previous episode of this, and also about using threat research. But let's get specific here. What was just one recent detection you built, and why did you focus on that one versus any other one?
yeah. So I mean, overall for like us, the way we prioritize content here is, customer requests obviously first and foremost are going to be a hot priority. The bulk when we first started as a startup, like it was like, hey, let's get MITRE coverage across the spectrum so that way we can offer that to our customers. And then now we're largely focused on, well, what do I look at? Well, what's my threat intel team telling me that's, the new hotness and things I need to be looking at to make sure that we have detections for. So I would say it's like as another org, if you're like looking at what you need to do, then I would say if you don't have anything that's managing, MITRE is a great stepping stone on what you might want to do. And then based off that, the threat intel, what are you worried about as an organization? Are you financial? Well, then you might have different things than the government, and that might be an important play. But I'll go ahead and share my screen. And we'll go over something that was recently given to me by Kevin Lowe, our researching guy, that dives deep into these. So basically, it was kind of breaking down Caspinero infection chain part two. So Signia kind of published this blog post and went over this campaign. So I was kind of like, why does this matter? Why did we look at? Well, the main being here is we had a rule for FOD helper bypass in the past that we had already created, but it didn't really go into depth on just the behaviors of what might be there. So mostly how this starts for me is I get this threat intel. It's like, oh, we don't have coverage, that might be able to find, edits to this registry key. This registry key is part of this behavior. So in order for FOD helper to use this bypass, it checks for these first. And that's how adversaries were able to get it to be able to use FOD helper for bypassing. So that's kind of what I do is I take the research that's given to me and I deep dive into what's going on and the various things. In this instance, I'm just going to stick with this one, but I would have to go through every one of these to look and see what we need to build and make sure that we have use cases for that that's for coverage. Because I'm an adamant component of not using IOCs for detection. And I know most detection engineers are on the same point and same vein there, but they are important. But for me, I hate them. So uh,
That's interesting to hear that as a detection engineer, you would say you hate IOCs. I mean, I don't disagree personally, right?
right.
I just think they're so time limited, and we've kind of gotten to the point where we realize that behaviors are the way to go. But that kind of brings up an important point where we're dependent on quality threat intelligence like this that analyzes those behaviors so that we can take that and turn that into a detection, right?
Yeah, for sure. 100%. So for me, next thing I would do is like just looking at this, it's like, okay, cool. They're making some registry key edits. They're using FOD helper to do the bypass. Like, what else is there? So then I would do some searches, and there's plenty of logs out there that kind of go over this. And this is a 2017 blog, so this has been out there for quite some time. And we did have some stuff in there, but we wanted to kind of deep dive into it a little bit more. Hide my controls, and then the next step would be, are there atomic red teams that are associated with this behavior and this detection, right? So luckily for us, there are. So that makes it really easy to be able to say, okay, how can I kind of duplicate this behavior in a controlled way that's not going to produce a result that I'm not expecting?
Yeah,
So
real quick on that. Now that you mentioned Atomic Red Team, just let me clarify for the audience. Like, if you're not familiar with the Atomic Red Team project, great open source project that's available for you to go check out. It basically lists out a lot of different ways that certain MITRE techniques can be executed in Windows, Linux environments. So it's great for what Eric is showing here, example of how to test your detections, and that's what we'll get into shortly. But if you're not familiar with Atomic Red Team, it's an awesome project.
yeah. So like I said, then I would deep dive into this, atomic. What's all here, right? Okay, cool. That's what exactly we were seeing in our intelligence report. Let's scroll up a little bit, see what's more. Hey, same thing, shell open command, but maybe a different hive that's associated with it. All right, so that makes it interesting. So now instead of focusing on just MS settings hive, I'm going to look at, shell open command hive. Like, and if you scroll down, you'll see a couple more shell open commands. This happens to be the same, and various other ways to bypass using this registry key. So that's what I'm going to look at. So real down and dirty, I'll just take that to my lab environment. Let's go ahead and specify a source.
Yeah, and this is a good segue to mention just a lab environment, right? This is a kind of a must for a detection engineer. You need a place where you can generate telemetry, where you can, analyze what these atomic red team tests generate in terms of logs and, other events so that you can validate what you're doing, which is what Eric's doing right now.
And we knew from the, just from the atomic in the article that they were using regadd to do this key. So I'm going to go ahead and just do the same thing, just a real quick regadd. And then we knew that FOD helper was going to be the way that they executed it. If I can spell today, that would be great. There we go. So then I just do a quick search. How loud may it be or may it not be? We should get 0 results. This shouldn't be in my lab very noisy since it's small. Yeah.
Yeah, and
So
an interesting point there too, right? Is distinguishing with a lab, it may be different from your production environment. You may have a lot of this occurrence for legitimate reasons, especially when you're dealing with, living off the land binaries and scripts or LOLBAS, right? As adversaries use these things, they can be used for legitimate purposes as well as nefarious purposes. So, in your environment, you may have a lot of these things, and so that's where the process will iterate on, just focusing in on what the actual badness is.
correct. So your mileage will vary. And we'll dive into that, kind of how we do our behaviors analysis for that. So we do a new share. So I've just basically RDP'd into one of my lab machines. We do have ways of running this remotely, but for most people starting out, the easiest way to do it would probably be to RDP. For atomics, it's really easy if you just go ahead and throw it into a batch script. And then you can determine on if your stuff worked. So all I did was create a new text document, save file as, and made it a batch file so that way I could run it nice and easy on my batch file. So all I need to do now is run it, execute, and then as you can see, now I have an administrator prompt that wasn't there before. So cool. Now that I've done that, let me get out of here and change my share back to where we were. Let's go ahead and do a search. So cool. This is what we have. Now, I run many different sources. Most detection engineers will probably run one. As you can see, right now we're getting stuff from Sysmon and Windows events at the same time, and that's perfectly fine. But we'll go ahead and we'll focus on Sysmon only just to make it easy. And then we'll deep dive a little bit into WinEvent as well, just a tad, just the way people can see kind of the different things. So great. So the way we kind of look at this is what we were expecting to see, right? Registry adding a key into the so great. So one detection would be, hey, show me when registry has added anything into the shell open command key. And that would be what I would consider one use case, one TI that we would use to generate events of interest for us and our insights. And that's how I would deep dive into that piece.
Yeah, and
And then,
just FYI, TI stands for threat identifier.
okay,
In Anvilogic parlance, we use that to describe discrete searches that we're looking for very specific behaviors. This being example of one.
so that's kind of what we're expecting there. So then let me make sure that we're also expecting to see FOD helper. So we'll just go ahead, since we've saw the registry helper there, we'll go ahead straight to FOD helper so that we can kind of deep dive into that. So that's what kind of we were expecting. Look, parent process being FOD helper. That's kind of weird. Why is FOD helper launching something, especially command.exe? So that would be something that we would look at is show me when FOD helper has been that process that has created either a suspicious process or a process that it's not normal to be doing. And normally that wouldn't be very many if you were running FOD helper in your environment. So that would be something we would consider a much higher level detection, especially when we're limiting it to launching files like command.exe, PowerShell, or any other things like that.
So specifically, you're saying in normal kind of everyday usage, FOD helper is not used to launch command.exe or PowerShell, essentially.
Yeah, 100%. You should
Okay.
not see that being launched by FOD helper. That's not what it's for. Features on
So,
demand, I believe, is what FOD stands for. Sorry,
okay.
my Navy's throwing different acronyms, foreign object debris at me, and that's not what it is. But features on demand, it's really like a language type assistance and other features that Windows has. So that would be one of them. So great. Now that we've got that, so we would expect to see similar Windows events, but let's just go ahead and see, hey, what do we have specifically just for the registry? So we saw the event one with the registry add, but we should be expecting, especially with Sysmon, an event 13 or event 12. And that's kind of what we see here to be able to say, okay, cool, now they're adding it. So this would be another rule, another threat identifier that I would create that's different. So already from just this one simple thing is for me how I would do it. We're already looking at three separate use cases and detections that would need to be built. Why? Because each one produces a different thing for me. FOD helper gives me a little bit more of a high confidence one, especially when I'm limiting it to just command or PowerShell. Registry additions into this folder is already suspicious, as we saw in the atomics. Like that's a common path that they're using. So seeing an add, an addition into that key would be there. And then another way to be able to look for that in case they change. Let's say they change, reg.exe. We've seen adversaries do this where they take common names of things, or if they change FOD helper, like they change registry, they change FOD helper. How am I going to detect this, this behavior based off that? Well, let me look for instances where the registry key is updated in that instance, and that allows me to still capture something even when adversaries are changing names and modifying files so that way they can try to avoid these kind of signature based style detections.
Yeah, that brings up an important point around the obfuscation that is so common, right? Like to your point, renaming these system binaries is a great way for them to avoid kind of static or brittle detections that don't account for that, right? And there's any number of names that could change it to, right? It's infinite. So to your point, right, we're looking, another way to do that is to look for that specific registry key that they would be modifying in order to execute this, and that is not going to change, right? So we can be able to look for that. Now, to your point, that may cast a little bit of a wider net in terms of false positive creation. But if we look for the other telltale signs, even though the executable names may be different, we can find that by leveraging, a little more broad search.
Yeah. And then as you can see, we go back to I just went back to Windows events. So just to double check everything. So we see our reg add, but what we don't see is the FOD helper. So let's just make sure we're not missing something with our detections. And because we should see that same thing with the parent process, so now we do. So here we are, our parent process of FOD helper going from
Mm.
there. So let's do the same thing. And the reason why I do this for Sysmon versus Windows events is, that way people can see kind of the different things that you're going to be able to see. Like Sysmon provides a heck of a lot of detail and a heck of a lot of data to give you the ability to create things that you're not going to be able to. And as you can see here, I'm just looking for this shell command, but all we're catching is the registry add. So the only time that you would be able to do this and catch this is if you're actually doing auditing on this command. And I specifically left it out for this purpose and disabled it for the purposes of this video to kind of highlight that. You need to know as a detection engineer what is being logged and how you're logging it to be able to capture it. And you would expect to kind of see this in various other things. So, I mean, let's just make sure that we're not, missing a source here that we need to be capturing. But that's kind of the point of why I specifically disabled it for us in this instance, so that you can see in this environment, if you don't log what you think or are expecting to log, you're going to be missing specific accesses that you need to be able to create a detection. So this isn't going to work for a Windows event detection. It might in your organization if you're logging the correct events that you need to log, where that auditing is enabled, so that maybe you can get those, 4657, I believe, is the registry events, or 4674s for, accesses to this, ownership to this file specifically. That way you can get and create those detections.
Yep. All right, cool. So looking at different log sources, thinking about the telemetry you're collecting, testing it out, all these types of things, these are very important. So are we done, or what else do we have to do here?
So now for us, it would be to create the detection in the platform, which we can kind of show. And the importance of that is to kind of highlight how we manage, I guess, detections and add metadata to detections. That way we understand various things. So I'll walk you through that really quick.
Yeah, so this is
Hopefully,
when he says the platform, he's talking about the Anvilogic platform where we put all of our detections. So when Eric and his team create them, he publishes them to basically a library of detections that we make available to all our customers called our Armory. But for those of you doing detection engineering at home, you would want to have some place that you captured the type of information that we're going to show here, right? Like a title, the domain, the description, the things that he's putting in terms of metadata. If you don't log those things, right, then all of a sudden now you just have detections mismatched in your environment. It's unclear what they're trying to do. And essentially, this is the documentation of detection engineering. And it's an important practice because you do it poorly, and your analysts that respond to these events will quickly not be your friend. So
yeah. Then just a quick down and dirty, like what the name is. So like when this does fire as a warning signal, we get that, and the description for the metadata will also be there, like what we're doing. Then I can categorize it, in this case, hacking. The impact here, I'm going to put medium, just because it's a behavioral based detection. We got to do a little bit more research into that. And a big piece for us is this related references. Like I can take my report that shows me where I got this research from, and just simply go back and add any reference page that might be of interest, including, the atomics if I wanted to kind of highlight, hey, this is where we got this detection and this thought process of why this detection was created and why we went from there. And next, MITRE, obviously great framework to utilize to help process this. I'm spoiled as a detection engineer because I get to be, I actually get to build these behavioral based detections. I get to auto compute some MITRE attack techniques, but we're also going to make sure that we get the sub techniques as well. That way we're really, and I've misspelt something.
think it's bypass user,
Yeah,
isn't
it is user account.
some reason it doesn't. Yeah, there it
Yep.
is.
So we can add that. And then obviously we're pulling all of this automatically from MITRE. This makes it easy for us. And quick down and dirty, I can specify what the victim platform is going to be. In this case, we know it's going to be Windows. Once again, just trying to collect that large metadata. We have many different ways of building logic against many different data repos. So I'm not going to go into this, but we do try to group things into macros to try to make things a little bit easier and a little bit more readable. And that way we can see what they are. And at the end, we provide a definition that kind of gives a baseline of what that activity was. Like, hey, this was the user evolved process, the command line, parent process, and maybe other things that a SOC 1 analyst might be able to utilize to make a determination on if this needs to be flagged up. Then the next big thing kind of here is this rule details where we specify, hey, this is a Windows subdomain, so you're not looking at Linux here. For us, we're going to go with warn mode. This is behavioral based detection. It needs some additional review just to determine. And then we just specify, hey, severity, medium once again. Why? Because I need to be able to re-evaluate this to see if it's there, but we've seen it used. Same with the confidence level. I'm medium assuming that this is going to be a confidence level across many of our customers. And obviously this gets updated based off our insights that we get from, all of our customers and stuff like that. So let's say this comes out to be a high fidelity detection across all of our customers. Some of these would change based off of that insight. And then once again, I can specify the data event category. So in this case, we can specify, whether Sysmon or Windows event log for this specific detection, and go from there. And then next, also, I can add triage steps like, hey, what should you do next? Validate whether or not this activity is expected. I'm glad they put spell check in here because I'm awful.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is important, very important, right? Triage steps, because this is what you want the analyst who is responding to this event to do next, right? What should they take action on? Because again, if we kind of think back to the goal of a detection engineer is to create an actionable insight for incident responders and analysts, right? So what is the action that you want them to take? If there's no action, then maybe you not kind of need to think about what you're doing as a detection engineer, as to why you're creating this detection, because you don't just want to be creating noise. You want somebody to be able to do something with
Exactly.
it. Is it looking for correlating activity? Is it, running a specific search? Is it checking with the user, right? Kind of like Eric's typed here, validate that the activity is expected, right? In other words, that this is normal administrator behavior and not anomalous, adversary behavior in your environment. So
Exactly. And then there's other things too, like validate, what else has occurred on the host within a certain period of time. Use pair process IDs and process IDs or handles to be able to like narrow things down to be able to give you a better answer. And obviously, I don't want to get into what Anvilogic provides, but that's kind of a one-step thing of like where you would go next with just having this one detection. Like this
yeah,
one detection might not work for you in a larger enterprise, but how can I narrow it down? Let me run it through. What are some common, denominators that I might be able to filter out to where this is becoming a much more usable detection for, the analyst to kind of review and be able to go with those next steps from that piece. But that's basically how we would build the detections for all of us and kind of the processes and thought processes I look through and really trying to deep dive into what the behavior of the activity is, how adversaries might circumvent my detections, or what logging is there. So how can I still create something to detect those one-offs, at least in that one instance of that way I can at least get something, some event of interest that I can then relook at to determine, hey, what went on at this period of time, and not necessarily have to deep dive into the logs, for the raw logs every single time I'm concerned about what's going on. Now I have some vetted intelligence at this point now, at this because that's what it becomes, to review rather than trying to find a needle in a haystack. Now I've got, significantly less hay to go through at that point.
yeah, awesome. Well, hey, really appreciate it, Eric. Thanks for taking some time to walk us through this. I think, some key points to kind of walk away with, right, is leveraging threat intel to start, using that as kind of the place where you jump off. You have to use some of your, experience and some of understanding to look for the key things to kind of pull out of that intelligence to start your detection. But, testing it out, running some examples in a lab environment so that you can make sure that you're collecting the right telemetry, that your detection is functioning as expected. And then, of course, it's capturing that, it's putting in metadata, it's storing that, it's providing kind of those next steps for the analyst as they go about their business. Again, we talked about it specifically a lot in the Anvilogic context, but this is the same type of thing that every organization has to do that's trying to accomplish detection engineering. So Eric, any last closing thoughts before we wrap this up?
I mean, no, not really. I mean, honestly, if you're just getting started and don't really know what to do, the Atomic Red Teams by Red Canary is a great starting point to kind of learn that. The MITRE and MITRE emulation plans, like deep dive into that piece. I'm speaking to beginners here, like, oh my gosh, where do I get started and potentially become a detection engineer? That's a good resource. TCM Security, I'm going to throw out a lot of people that I get a lot of good stuff from too. They've got great training. So I would check out, some of those things. Obviously, the first two were free, and learn as you go. But I've taken some of the TCM courses. I haven't taken the new one for detection engineering yet. But I will say, like, that's a great resource that's available to people. That's relatively cheap. That you can get a lot of training. Really good training. So just recommend that piece if you're new. what do I need to do to get started? You get inundated with all of these SANS courses, and those are great courses, but $5,000 is a significant amount of money to be dropping on some training courses up front. So I would, you would want to get some experience, I think, before you trying to deep dive into that level of money, from my perspective. But
Yeah.
I'll close it off with that.
Awesome. No, thanks for those tips. Appreciate that. Valuable. So thanks everybody for watching. Hope you have a great day, and look for us next time.